So, okay, let's move to the second question now. The second case
Mm-hmm.
study. So this
Okay.
is less related to product, but more towards your thought process of approaching your problem
Okay.
solving skills.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Okay.
as you might know, we are in a state of, you could say, national emergency. There is a healthcare crisis going on.
Right.
Our hospitals
Mm-hmm.
are flooded, and
Right.
if we look at it, even within the hospital, you would find problems where you would least expect it. I would say elevators is one of
Right.
them, because elevators
Fair
are
enough.
closed, confined spaces where people come in close contact
Mm-hmm.
with each other. And given the
Right.
hospital setup, there will be patients, there will be frontline workers, there will be doctors, there will be patients'
Right.
relatives, there will be people coming in for
Mm-hmm.
regular check-ins, etc., etc. There will be
Right.
prospective patients as well. So,
Got it.
given given the deluge and the numbers currently, how will you
Mm-hmm.
uh, design the best algorithm to utilize the elevator
Okay.
system in a hospital?
Okay. Cool. So I think before I start off with the entire mechanism, I would like to ask again a few clarification questions. So are we talking about a regular elevator wherein there is like a up-down button, a single door, a single floor wherein a user could drop off at? So is it like a regular elevator, or are there any special amenities to it?
No, no, just a regular elevator, uh, which you find.
Got it.
I think, yeah, nothing special about the elevators.
Got it. Okay. So considering it's a hospital setting that we are in, I would also like to assume a few things. So firstly, I would like to assume that the the basic ambulance parking would be on the ground floor, and that's where patients could come from. Um, and apart from that, also some of the basic guest amenities are on the ground floor. These are few assumptions that I'm laying down. The other major assumption is that currently this elevator would not have any special or a restricted use case. It would be allowed only for patients, and that too limited amount of patients. Let's say two per elevator.
Okay.
With these assumptions, I'd like to move on and create an entire structure for it. If you don't have any other inputs to give me.
No, nothing. No, I think these are very fair, reasonable, and fair assumptions. So you can go ahead with it.
Got it. Cool. Can I take a minute to create a structure out of it, and then I'll let you know how I would like to proceed with it.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Please.
Okay. Cool. So I'm ready with my basic structure. Should I
Right.
go ahead with it?
Yep.
Cool. All right. So I think some of the basic things that I'd like to take care of while designing this algorithm is initially I would want to clarify that this elevator algorithm would have a sequential movement. By sequential movement, I would also, really have an energy efficient outcome. So by sequential, what I mean is that if the direction is upwards or downwards, then we are going from the lowest requested floor to the highest requested floor. So there'll be no change in directions in between if there is a highest requested floor in place. So having a sequential movement would really make the entire flow much more energy efficient and much more easier. Also, considering it's a hospital, this sequential movement really makes sense because ultimately patients are supposed to go to the final destination in the least possible time.
Right.
The second point that I would like to highlight is that since that what we'll be doing is that we'll be continuously processing the patient's requests and updating the algorithm dynamically. So I would expect in a hospital to have multiple floors with patients accessing the elevator. And ultimately, it's important that we also update the algorithm dynamically, because every person would have a different flow to go to. And the third point is that, when there are no requests, by requests I mean when there are no calls, or when the elevator doesn't have any major tasks to or fro, then I would like the elevators to be idle either at the bottom floor or the topmost floor. So for the purpose of this discussion, let's consider there are two elevators. So if there are two elevators, I would want one of them to be on the ground floor and the other one to be on the topmost floor. The idea behind this is that you will be able to cater to all the flows in the least possible time by having such a combination. And from a probability point of view as well, the time that it would take for an elevator to come from, let's say it's a 10-story building, so from the ground floor to the fourth floor is definitely very optimized.
Got it.
Um, Apart from that, what I would also concentrate on is that the elevator proceeds in the same direction till the last request is made in that direction. This is again a continuation of the first point that I had made, which is sequential movement. And the fifth point is that the requests should also be logged in a priority manner in the memory of the elevator's algorithm. So the priority order would be in this way, like the first element that I would consider in the priority order would be the flows which are the closest. So
Mm,
that's definitely really important, especially for patients. Then the second is the
right.
direction of the request. Finally, the last point that I would like to make is that the drop-offs can also be queued sequentially while optimizing and updating the route plan. As I had mentioned in my second point, that it is definitely getting updated, but drop-offs have to be queued some way. And this doesn't mean that we don't pick up requests from the incoming medium. Even that should be taken care of.
Okay.
So these are a few of the basic parameters that I could think of
Mm.
before I design the algorithm for this elevator. Do you think that it sounds fair, or would you want me to consider a few other things here?
No, I think this sounds fair. Already there are way too many
Okay.
variables. I assume something simpler, but
Okay.
you can carry on.
Okay. Got it. Cool. So I think how I would like to implement this algorithm is that basically I would want to implement two different controllers. The first would be a listen controller to take in all the requests that the elevator could get, and the second controller would be like a move controller, which could help the elevator to move across and really prioritize the requests of the users.
Right.
So ultimately, these two controllers would have major control of the entire algorithm. The move controller could have three more sub parameters. So there could be a stop parameter, there could be a go parameter, and an idle parameter. All these three
Mhm.
parameters basically would function on the same logics that I had laid out earlier. So ultimately, if I would consider a particular flow to be like, then as I had mentioned, both of these controllers, so the listen controller would constantly listen new requests and dynamically update the queue. And the move controller
Okay.
would constantly check the elevator's current flow and issue commands for whether the elevator should move or it should, stop or it should be idle. And the entire algorithm would again use the same logics that I had mentioned earlier as the six basic
Mm.
points that create a foundation for this entire algorithm.
Okay. Makes sense.
Right. Apart from that, I think some of the metrics that I would consider to really check the efficiency of this algorithm would be firstly the wait time that patients are facing per elevator.
Mhm.
Secondly, also the average time that people are spending inside the elevator, because as per my own algorithm, there is a sequential movement, and my priority order takes in two major parameters, which is the direction of the flow and also the flows which are closest. So I would also like to optimize it through this particular metric. And finally, the last metric that I could think of is the average number of stops per cycle. So from by cycle, I mean an elevator that is dropping off a person and coming back to idle position. So what is the average time that's taking an elevator to go from idle to idle? And majorly, I feel that these three metrics would really help me optimize and create an algorithm that is benefiting the patients in this COVID era.
Got it. And how would you measure the costs to actually implement this algorithm?
Okay. So I think in terms of cost, majorly I think most of the parameters that I've considered creates a very energy efficient and a very cost efficient methodology of the elevators moving across. Majorly, how I would calculate cost is by understanding that what is the kind of electricity that is or energy that is being consumed when the move controller is functioning in go to command. So that's when the elevator is actually moving, and the amount of time that's being taken when the elevator is executing these commands, that time would definitely be one of the major metrics of understanding what's the kind of energy that's being utilized. And apart from that, I think since we're already limiting the elevator to carry two patients on a maximum level, I don't think there are majorly any other parameters like um, overburdening or overweight of the elevator or any other such parameters that could really affect the cost. Some of the minor parameters would include if an elevator, there is um, some kind of a problem and people want to go for an alarm. But those are some very minor parameters that I wouldn't like to consider for this particular discussion.
Yeah, we can ignore the edge cases for now.
Right.
Okay, that's all from my side, Shrey. Thanks a lot. Are there
Mhm.
any questions you'd like to ask me before we end this?
I think both the questions were pretty interesting, and majorly I also really uh, loved giving this interview. I think one of the major questions that I would like to ask is currently, what's the kind of product manager that you are expecting to fulfill this vacancy at your company?
So I guess what uh, I think it's a very fairly generic requirement when it comes to product, though it is not too common. So in a product world, what is needed from a ideal PM or a product team member is ability to communicate the requirements, get people aligned fairly clearly. So that is why having these case study interviews where you have to structure your thoughts and communicate them effectively. Second is, of course,
Hmm.
having those problem solving abilities. Uh,
Right.
so there is a problem after all. It has to make coherence, whatever you are saying, to what the question is asked. And third
Hmm.
is the ability to use data to measure things. So, like how you used, what can be the success metrics of a particular algorithm, or how you were talking about your Zomato, where your recommendation engine improved the results or efficiency by 5%. Sorry. So those are some of the things that are extremely important for a product aspirant as well. uh, Given these three, one last thing I would like to add is having a business context, or at least understanding that every business has some constraints, and with those constraints come priorities. And that is why there was a stress on, not just listing down your possible feature requests or requirements, but also prioritizing them in a particular manner. I think we can close this then.